China held military exercises around Taiwan for 2 days running this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, sending warships and fighter planes very close to the island. China says this was in response to Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te after he called China a foreign hostile force. China responded by calling President Lai a parasite. The 2-day exercises focused on the Chinese military's ability to control and seal off both the seas as well as skies around Taiwan. This happened on the eastern and southern side of the Taiwan island, from where it is harder for China to attack. It is also from the far side, going from China towards Taiwan. In the East China Sea, which is further away from Taiwan, the Chinese forces held live-fire long-distance strikes. These were on simulated targets of key ports and energy facilities. The idea of the Chinese exercises was to ensure that Taiwan is encircled from both the east and the west, ensuring that its critical supply routes are choked off by Chinese warships and aircraft.
中方开展联合演训，是对赖清德当局猖狂谋独挑衅的坚决惩戒，是对台独分裂势力蓄意破坏台海和平的严正警告，是捍卫国家主权、安全和领土完整的负责任之举。任何外部势力无权对此说三道四。
Chinese officials have said that the display of military might was prompted by a speech that President Lai gave on the 13th of March, in which he called China a foreign hostile force. In that speech, President Lai had laid out about 17 measures which he said would combat deepening Chinese subversion on the island and also China's deep-seated espionage inside Taiwan. One of the measures included restoring military tribunals to hear cases against military personnel who are accused of spying.
有现役、退役军人被中国收买、出卖情报，甚至组建武装力量，计划伤害自己的国家和国人。有艺文工作者为了个人事业上的利益，不惜配合北京的指令，说自己的国家不是国家。
Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense countered the Chinese military weaponry that had approached Taiwan on the first day of the exercises. More than 70 sorties by military aircraft, including drones. More than 20 naval ships ranged around the island, including a group that accompanied the aircraft carrier, the Shandong, which was about 200 nautical miles east of Taiwan. None of the Chinese warships or airplanes managed to cross a boundary which is the defense identification zone of around 25 nautical miles around Taiwan. The Chinese Coast Guard also announced that it had sent ships on law enforcement patrolling around 2 groups of islands that are controlled by Taiwan. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory, and officials describe President Lai as an independence separatist. The exercises by China were intended to warn Taiwan of the real risks and the real costs of a blockade. A joint blockade would use China's big weaponry, both airplanes and warships, to stop Taiwan independent separatists from escaping. It would also, more crucially, prevent outside assistance from entering the Taiwan Straits. If Taiwan loses its sea supply lines, then its domestic resources would be exhausted in a matter of weeks, and thereby its social order would descend into chaos. That is China's game plan. But despite Beijing's fiery language and its sizable military display, experts say that these exercises appeared intended only to intimidate Taiwan without actually tipping over into a full-blown confrontation. President Lai and his Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, deny that Taiwan is a part of China. On Tuesday, Chinese media published cartoons which depicted President Lai as a parasitic grub. While Beijing has linked the exercises to what President Lai said in his mid-March speech, China's leaders also appear to be sending a message implicitly to the Trump administration. President Lai has sought to maintain American support for Taiwan during President Trump's term, including by making a promise to raise Taiwan's military spending to more than 3% of its economic output this year, something that would be music to Trump's ears. That has been a big bugbear with Trump, particularly when it comes to America's NATO and European allies. But Trump has not promised to follow the long-held American position of strategic ambiguity when it comes to defending Taiwan. All American presidents, from President Ronald Reagan onwards in the 1980s, have followed this policy of strategic ambiguity. America He's not necessarily militarily treaty bound to defend Taiwan if it is attacked by China. Yes, in spirit maybe, but definitely not in letter. America maintains what is a carefully constructed policy of strategic ambiguity, which is rooted in the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. The act has a provision which simply mandates American supply of defensive weapons to Taiwan. It requires maintaining the capacity of Taiwan to resist any resort to force by its opponents in case it is to be attacked by China. The Taiwan Relations Act does not legally obligate the United States to intervene militarily. Instead, it simply says that the President of the United States and the US Congress must determine an appropriate response.
Mr. President, you've been very clear in saying that as long as you're president, Iran will never get a nuclear weapon.
That's true.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position. And if I said it, I certainly wouldn't be saying it to you. I'd be saying it to other people, maybe people around this table, and very specific people around this table. So I don't want to put myself in that position.
The Chinese exercises come just days after the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was in Tokyo to discuss strengthening military ties with Japan. Hegseth said that the Trump administration will focus on countering Chinese hard power, including its efforts to squeeze Taiwan.
China's rehearsals could potentially always be a rehearsal for an attack. The rehearsals, the exercises, the campaigns we're doing in and around the first island chain are not meant to be the precursor to an attack. We're here to deter. We're here to show strength with our allies, and that includes ensuring that in every possible way American force is projected forward. So we don't want to see a conflict at all.
Still, China may not have an appetite right now for an extended military exercise that could deepen divisions between the Trump administration and China's leader Xi Jinping. Xi is already squaring off with Trump over additional US tariffs on Chinese goods that were imposed last month. Right now, there are 20% tariffs on Chinese goods entering America. China, too, has responded with retaliatory tariffs against American goods. America has also imposed reciprocal tariffs on China, all of which threaten to completely upend the $500 billion trade between Beijing and Washington annually. The official Chinese statements about the latest exercises did not mention the United States directly. China will respond with just enough firmness to make sure that there is an off-ramp for it, which still remains open. Crossing the Taiwan Strait could be perilous for China's forces, even with more options for getting ashore. The United States could send forces to help Taiwan against China, completely upending its strategic ambiguity policy, and that would potentially also raise the risk of war between two nuclear powers. There are reports that Xi Jinping has ordered the People's Liberation Army of China to be able to militarily take over Taiwan by 2027. Xi has not said that China would definitely invade Taiwan, but there is no debate about Beijing's intentions, and now increasingly so, its capabilities. The same cannot be said of Trump's America.